Hey everyone, my name is Janelle Lara, and I focus specifically on the intersections between Christianity and spirituality in my work. And today I'm very excited to discuss a unique and possibly surprising topic, which is that of the Catholic Church and the practice of Reiki, and why I believe that the Church should reconsider its stance on the practice in light of new scientific and medical evidence, which we will discuss today. But first, let's define the terms and give a bit of context. Reiki is a healing art of Japanese origin that has been a somewhat contentious subject among Catholics. In a Reiki session, the practitioner uses various hand motions as well as intention to channel energy through themselves, not from themselves, to the patient in order to promote healing, balance, and well-being. It is considered New Age and did not have a lot of scientific evidence supporting it until recently. So the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops released a statement in 2009 advising against the practice. What I'm going to propose here is a consideration of the evidence and a reconsideration of the USCCB's position on Reiki in light of that evidence. I'm also going to post all of my sources below in case you want to check them out. I completely understand and recognize the reasoning behind the conference's initial hesitancy. Channeling energy, the use of intention, and other aspects of the practice could be used incorrectly to great harm to the recipient and the practitioner. Even with medical evidence supporting it, I still don't necessarily recommend that every Catholic run to their nearest Reiki healer. However, being in alignment with the truth matters to the Church and its people. I'm going to propose that the Catholic Church, in a sense, reappropriate the practice and allow it to be incorporated into the practices espoused by the Church and wrapped and protected by the light of Church's teachings and imbued with the Holy Spirit. In the same way that we as a church have incorporated meditation and breath work into modern practice through apps like Hallow, we can do the same with other spiritual traditions that initially seem foreign, but actually end up being supportive after undergoing the scrutiny of scientific inquiry. There are three main components to today's conversation. First, I'm going to discuss the difference between how the Church's magisterium has responded to really all themes considered New Age, which includes Reiki. And then I will contrast that with how the prominent Catholic clergy and laity on social media, which I will often refer to in this discussion as YouTube theologians, have sort of taken that incredibly measured response and unfortunately run for the hills. Secondly, I'm going to do some digging into the scientific evidence supporting Reiki, both in the sense of how Reiki and all energy healing really could actually be supported by quantum physics as a practice, meaning that quantum physics does show how it could work if it did work, but also how Reiki is actually substantially supported in the medical literature. Most Catholic statements concerning Reiki were made before 2021, but in the past 3 years, many high-quality studies have been released. These studies incorporate standards like control groups, blind variables, and objective forms of gathering data that weren't present in previous studies, and frankly, they're very persuasive. Third, we are going to do a deep dive into the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops' response to Reiki through a statement released again in 2009. Since they base their premise on Reiki not having support in the scientific literature, we will re-explore that assumption based on today's evidence. As a result of these three conversations, I'm going to conclude by really giving some pushback on how the YouTube theologians and American Catholics on social media are behaving regarding practices that are considered New Age, but actually are finding evidence in the scientific literature. Catholic alternative media personalities, one after another, demand that the laity stand up against aspects of culture which, after further investigation, end up being somewhat harmless. Of course, I have to add a qualifier like somewhat, because any obsession or anything or practice that you rely on or seek out more than God has the potential to be harmful. Regardless, the witch hunts need to stop, and American Catholics need to learn how to be discerning when it comes to practices that they simply don't understand. And we need to learn how to differentiate between something that is actually evil and something that's simply foreign. Now, I want to be very clear here. There are certainly some New Age practices that are evil, wrong, and even satanic. Specifically, Ouija boards, casting predictive horoscopes, and necromancy come to mind. The Church does not need to take a deep dive and reimagine how practices that are blatantly evil could be incorporated into our faith. However, there is a difference between practices that are blatantly evil and simply not recommended simply because we don't have enough information or because we are misguided. Reiki is of the latter category, which means that if new science comes out to support it, it's up for debate. There are also some pervasive and underlying beliefs that undergird New Age philosophy that I do want to touch base on here. The worship of the self, Gnosticism, and relativism are dangerous ideologies that Catholics, and really all humans, should take care to avoid. Now, before I dive into Reiki specifically, let's get really clear on what's wrong with the ideology presented by the New Age so that we don't continue to confuse Eastern practices with Gnostic and pagan beliefs. Here's what the Magisterium has to say about the New Age. In 1989, the Vatican published what seems to be the first official response to the New Age topics, specifically on meditation and prayer. In this document, they state, with the present diffusion of Eastern methods of meditation in the Christian world and in ecclesial communities, we find ourselves faced with a pointed renewal of an attempt, which is not free from dangers and errors, to fuse Christian meditation with that which is non-Christian. However, in the footnotes of the same document, Pope St. John Paul II is quoted in a homily given on November 1st, 1982. Any method of prayer is valid insofar as it is inspired by Christ and leads to Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. Now, that wasn't an infallible statement, but I do think it needs to be taken into consideration in light of these topics. The deduction is that the problem is not the practice of meditation in this case, but the fusion or reduction of meditation and prayer with unchristian beliefs and heretical ideology. Throughout this presentation, I will continue to point out the differences between a beneficial practice and unfairly yoking it to a negative belief system. In 1996, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger also wrote against the New Age. Of course, he later became Pope Benedict XVI, but in 1996, he was still a cardinal, and he shared the current situation of faith and theology when meeting with the doctrinal commissions of Latin America. He also discussed, again, the dangers of New Age ideology, and he noted, for the supporters of the New Age, the solution to the problem of relativity must not be sought in a new encounter of the self with others, but by overcoming the subject in an ecstatic return to the cosmic dance. It offers at the same time a considerably anti-rationalist model of religion, a modern mystic. The absolute is not to be believed, but to be experienced. God is not a person to be distinguished from the world, but a spiritual energy present in the universe. This is not only renouncing modernity, but man himself. The gods return. They have become more believable than God. The primitive rites must be renewed in which the self is initiated into the mystery of the whole and is liberated from itself. Now, the reduction of God from our absolute, omnipotent, and ever-present creator, as the Catechism says, the beginning and end of all things, to simply a spiritual energy present in the universe is not a small error, and he's right to point that out. In fact, as we will soon discuss, this underlying energy in the universe has long been discovered by quantum physics, but it's not God, and that's an important distinction. It is part of and dependent on creation, that underlying energy, which God is not. In 2003, the Pontifical Councils for Culture and Interreligious Dialogue published a provisional report for those involved in pastoral care to understand and, quote, explain how the New Age movement differs from the Christian faith. While the report warns against the Gnostic ideology presented among New Age philosophy, it also acknowledges that it would be unwise and untrue to say that everything connected with the New Age movement is good or that everything about it is bad. So you'll notice if you choose to read each of these Vatican documents that again will be linked below, that usually specific practices are not condemned. In fact, in almost all cases, it is the ideology that is under scrutiny. The problem is that contrary to this reasonable and measured response, many members of the laity and clergy, in particular apologists and some exorcists, have taken it upon themselves to label anything New Age as evil. However, their evidence comes from a wayward source. There are exorcists online who claim to extract information from demons during exorcisms. And they have stated that the demons told them, or that they overheard the demons speaking to each other, that basically all practices associated with New Age spirituality are demonic and should be avoided entirely. The danger here is that nearly all of these naysayers are using, again, supposed information given to exorcists by demons during exorcisms as their evidence. In fact, many exorcists claim to hear occult information, including how demons possessed a person, during the act of exorcising them from the possessed. This presents a big problem because the church does not recognize information spoken by demons during exorcisms as true at all. In fact, the church knows that demons are liars. They are not to be spoken with, aside from testing the spirits. Jimmy Akin, a popular Catholic apologist, reminds us that the exorcism rite includes no prayer that can compel demons to tell the truth. In short, the information demons give is not to be used as educational material. Hello? It seems that these YouTube theologians are taking their teaching license too far, and unfortunately they and their sources can't always be trusted. Now, finally, let's move on to Reiki and take a look at what the science says about the practice before we continue to address the church's response. So again, Reiki is a healing modality where the practitioner channels energy to the patient in order to promote healing, balance, and well-being. The International Association of Reiki Professionals states, Reiki is not affiliated with any particular religion or religious practice. It is not massage, nor is it based on belief or suggestion. It is a subtle and effective form of energy work using spiritually guided life force energy. The term Reiki comes from the Japanese language and translated means universal life energy. Now, Catholics who are against the practice might question, wait a minute, what energy is being channeled here and how do we know it's good? Which is a valid question. But I think an important distinction needs to be made here about the various categories of the human person. There is one, the physical, which includes the mental and emotional aspects of us. And then there is two, the spiritual, through which one might channel spirits, good or bad. But the foundation of all things physical, the first category, is energy. So therefore, it follows that energy healing can and maybe should, and in many hospitals already is, be considered as an integral part to a holistic approach to health and wellness. See, Reiki is based upon the belief that within every living thing, there is a universal life energy flowing within us. And this concept is foreign to Christian tradition, but modern quantum physics actually supports it. Although physicists wouldn't use the language of, quote, life force energy, the basis of everything is subatomic kinetic and potential energy, consisting of the empty space within atoms, which is not actually empty at all, but rather filled with an energetic phenomenon called quarks. Furthermore, through the well-known double-slit experiment, physics shows that an observer can affect electrons without touching them and change their behavior through mere intention. So in short, yes, we can manipulate energy. Obviously, ancient Eastern cultures and religions did not have access to this sophisticated scientific knowledge, and neither did Christians. However, it is not beyond the realm of reason, and it's also not anti-Catholic to think that God may have chosen to reveal this aspect of the physical world to them in a language they could understand, in the same way that so much technological and other scientific advances were revealed and discovered in the East first, before they became West. As it were, Eastern tradition has claimed for thousands of years that we all have access to life force energy, and we can connect with it in order to help ourselves or others, and this is not an inherently evil belief. Now, in terms of where Reiki came from, it's unclear. It's widely believed that Mikao Usui, a Japanese man, rediscovered the healing energy of Reiki and brought it to the West in his travels in the early 1900s. However, the truth about its origin story is fuzzy at best. Honestly, YouTube theologians might say that that fact in and of itself could be proved of demonic origins. But what if I were to ask about the origin of language or medicine? Like many aspects of modern human behavior or other forms of healing, such as the origin of midwifery or the origin of the use of herbs, Reiki just seems to be the result of a larger medicinal tradition, which has been pieced together over many millennia through human trial and error, and is simply ingrained into Eastern healing traditions, which, again, does not automatically make it wrong. In recent years, the science has caught up. Peer-reviewed medical journals have published studies sharing the efficacy of Reiki to reduce stress and anxiety among patients with various ailments. In controlled study reviews with up to 800 participants, Reiki was found to reduce health and procedural anxiety in patients with chronic conditions such as gastrointestinal inflammation, fibromyalgia, and depression, as well as in the general population. While Reiki has traditionally been seen as an alternative therapy, several mainstream hospitals, such as the Massachusetts General Hospital, which is where Harvard is, Johns Hopkins, and the Boston Children's Hospital, are incorporating it into their patient care, especially for long-term cancer patients. Now, it is helpful to note here that just because a medical practice is mainstream doesn't make it good, but this does directly contradict a USCCB statement that I will expand upon further, which states that there is no evidence for Reiki among the medical science. To the contrary, it seems that some hospitals do consider Reiki a beneficial means of healing and alleviating pain among patients, especially since they've chosen to commit valuable time, resources, and staff to the practice. Again, what makes Reiki worth considering for Catholics is not that it's common, but it's the fact that it has been proven to be effective in improving overall health outcomes in hospitalized patients, as well as, again, the general population. I already mentioned one study, and in another study with 156 stage 3 and 4 cancer patients, Reiki interventions were found to be effective in reducing levels of pain, analgesic use, and fatigue. In 2022, a study with 2 control groups and 102 participants showed that after receiving Reiki sessions, women who had undergone a hysterectomy experienced a statistically significant improvement in pain levels, and it reduced the use of analgesics overall, that's pain medication. This particular study is exceptionally informative because in addition to pre- and post-session surveys, for which it could be argued that they were too subjective because they were coming from the patient, they also took the patient's vital signs, such as pulse rate, respiratory rate, and blood pressure. Researchers found a significant improvement of those objective vital signs in the Reiki group. Now, it's important to mention that it is clear Reiki is not a methodology that is intended to necessarily eradicate physical ailments, but rather to help improve outcomes, reduce pain, and support the health of the patient through the process, which is valuable. So, with that scientific evidence in mind, let's discuss the Church's response specifically to Reiki. In 2009, the USCCB released a joint document entitled Guidelines for Evaluating Reiki as an Alternative Therapy. This document states, as its conclusion, since Reiki therapy is not compatible with either Christian teaching or scientific evidence, it would be inappropriate for Catholic institutions, such as Catholic healthcare facilities, to promote or to provide support for Reiki therapy. While it is true that in 2009, the evidence for Reiki was scarce and inconclusive at best, that's no longer the case. Additionally, the incitation of Christian teaching as an incompatibility is a little bit confusing, since Reiki is not affiliated with any religious practice. Additionally, since 2009, there have been a myriad of studies released that quantify compelling scientific proof of the efficacy of Reiki and disprove what has been declared. An additional premise of the document is that we cannot invoke God's power at will to heal, in their assumption that Reiki is a spiritual practice, not a natural one. However, I believe that the evidence shows that this is a false assumption. They're not trying to invoke God's will to heal. They're invoking modern physics. They're invoking the basis of all things. They're invoking energy. The document also insists upon scientific healing methods being employed, not pseudoscientific ones to support the sick, which is good and true. But the document admonishes Reiki for not having clear scientific support, despite, again, the lack of studies at that time. The USCCB itself acknowledges Christian charity demands that we not neglect natural means of healing people who are ill. However, what about increasing comfort, mental health, and reducing pain? One can conclude that it appears inconsistent with Christian charity to deny a research-proven, peer-reviewed, cost-effective, and non-invasive therapy to those suffering. Finally, the conference states, neither the scriptures nor the Christian tradition as a whole speak of the natural world as based on universal life energy that is subject to manipulation by the natural human power of thought and will. While it is true that Christian tradition and scripture do not speak of the subatomic energy that exists within the microscopic atomic structures that make up our world in such terms, that is because those terms did not exist when the scriptures were written. Regardless, neither the scriptures nor Christian tradition claim to be resources for sound scientific or medical knowledge. So the fact that there is an omission of a physical phenomena that modern physics has only recently found to exist is frankly a poor case. To be honest, it appears as though the Catholic Church in the United States simply spoke too soon. It would have been more clear and more correct if the conference had said something like, as of yet, there are no definitive scientific studies that show whether or not Reiki is an effective form of therapy, and continue to share their perspective in those contingent terms, especially since the document doesn't maintain that there is anything overt about Reiki, simply that it appears contrary to the currently available medical science and Christian tradition as they were interpreting it. Again, the Vatican does not speak of Reiki directly. However, as we've already discussed, it does have significant commentary on the New Age. In 2003, the Pontifical Council for Culture and Interreligious Dialogue released a provisional report entitled Jesus Christ, the Bearer of the Water of Life, a Christian Reflection on the New Age. It states, even if it can be admitted that New Age religiosity in some way responds to the legitimate spiritual longing of human nature, it must be acknowledged that its attempts to do so run counter to Christian revelation. This statement is correct when referring to the Gnostic ideology of New Age spirituality. However, we must again consider separating formerly religious or spiritual practices from those that are now scientifically supported. All traditions cannot be beholden to their spiritual origins forever. Jimmy Akin, again, when discussing yoga, of all things, actually mentioned the genetic fallacy, which is when an argument or idea is dismissed based on its origin. Now, to be fair, Akin in the same episode quotes the USCCB when answering a question about Reiki and mentions how the scientific evidence at the time does not support it. But again, that was recorded in 2021, before the best studies on Reiki therapy had been released. However, the genetic fallacy still holds when discussing many of these New Age practices that, again, YouTube theologians and exorcists want to insist are evil. Just because something came from a specific ideology or culture doesn't mean it can evolve. And oftentimes, doesn't mean it can't evolve. And oftentimes, it becomes almost unrecognizable from the original. A modern example of this is the way that we can now separate dieting for vanity reasons from fasting for spiritual reasons, or for the purposes of using food as medicine. Before the early 1800s, you did not restrict calories on purpose, but things have changed. People have changed, and so now we diet. The tools we use to maintain health have evolved. Intention is important, and there's a difference between using intention as an excuse to commit evil acts and realizing that when it comes to objects or practices that are not in and of themselves inherently evil, such as in this case Reiki, that there really is a difference between using a knife to cut an onion or a knife to kill a human. Other examples of medical practices that have distanced themselves from their spiritual and Eastern roots would be chiropractic and acupuncture. In light of all of this information, I propose that the Catholic Church take another look at Reiki and energy healing as a whole, as well as other alternative practices, specifically those that have a strong standing in the medical and scientific literature, and consider how they could be in alignment with Catholic spirituality. And it's worth exploring based on what the quantum physics and the recent medical studies show. Since Reiki has been shown to have actual, measurable therapeutic effects, how can we give permission for these methods to be incorporated into practice in a way that aligns with church teaching? And how can the church, in turn, provide an example of how lay Catholics can discern what is right or wrong about foreign practices they may come across, as these are bound to continue to come into our purview faster than Vatican councils can gather to discuss and discern them? Again, the goal here would be for the Catholic Church to give the laity a model. I'm not advocating for total anarchy here, by which to discern the wheat from the chaff in alternative spiritual traditions, rather than making hyper-dogmatic blanket statements that may reduce trust in church leaders and cause undue discomfort to patients within the care of Catholic hospitals worldwide. We've already seen how this incorporation can be well done and effective, like I said, with the Hallow app, a Catholic app which offers prayerful meditations and breathwork sessions to the faithful. It's a great start. It does not appear that the church has to accept heretical teachings or compromise in any meaningful way to acknowledge that there is energy within each person and that we have the means, ability, and permission to access it at any time. It also appears that doing so intentionally is legitimately beneficial when done for the purpose of the comfort and stress reduction of the recipient. While accessing energy can certainly be done dangerously, isn't that all the more reason for the church to get involved and create structures by which the laity can practice things like Reiki in a safe manner? It is absolutely possible that in 100 years, medicine will have transformed completely, with doctors and medical staff working at the atomic and subatomic level to heal illnesses. For the majority of church history, church scientists and clergy have been at the forefront of medical advancement, knowledge, and care. I believe that by reappropriating these healing methods and creating Catholic models by which practitioners can support patients at the subatomic level, even before it becomes mainstream, we can greatly influence medical and popular culture in ways we cannot yet imagine. Thank you all so much for joining me in this discussion. I hope the picture that I've painted here has helped you to imagine a new, healthier, and an even more Catholic future. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Please feel free to share them with me. Bye, everyone.